This Filmmaker IQ lesson is proudly sponsored by RØDE microphones, premium microphones and audio accessories for studio, live, and location recording. Hi, John Hess from FilmmakerIQ.com, and today we're going to open a curious copyright case and sort through the web of rights surrounding the holiday classic, It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, so you still think killing yourself would make everyone feel happier, eh?
Oh, I don't know. I guess you're right. I suppose it'd been better if I'd never been born at all.
What'd you say?
I said I wish I'd never been born.
It's a Wonderful Life tells the story of George Bailey, a man who always seems to put his dreams on hold to help others in need, until one day a crisis brings him to the edge of suicide. Tasked to save him, his guardian angel Clarence shows how the world would be worse off had he never been born. But you already knew that. Produced in 1946, It's a Wonderful Life was Jimmy Stewart and Frank Capra's first post-war film. During the war, Stewart served in the Air Force, while Capra worked behind the lines producing a series of films for the U.S. Army entitled Why We Fight. Now, It's a Wonderful Life was filmed on RKO's studio backlot in Encino, California, taking up nearly 4 acres, which included a 300-yard main street with 75 stores and buildings and a residential neighborhood. Capra even installed 20 full-grown oak trees to create Bedford Falls Central Street. Production started on April 15, 1946, and ended on July 27th, exactly hitting its 90-day schedule. Now, to be eligible for that year's Oscar ceremony, the release date was moved up to December 20th, 1946. Unfortunately, the film opened to lukewarm reviews. Although it was in the top movie earners of that year, it didn't do enough business to recoup production costs. The following March at the Academy Awards, It's a Wonderful Life was up for 5 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Editing, and Best Sound Recording. But it walked away with none of those, instead picking up an Academy Award for RKO's Special Effects Department, which invented a new kind of chemical snow for the film. The old method of snow used painted cornflakes. A constant crunching would have been murder on the sound recorders. The new method was a type of soap bubble, which you can kind of see from these shots of the final scene. Now, as a box office loss with no major Academy Award wins, It's a Wonderful Life slipped into obscurity. Through a clerical error or just lack of interest, the copyright on the film was not renewed in 1974, and the film fell into the public domain. And that's when It's a Wonderful Life began to earn its wings. Here's a film starring one of Hollywood's biggest classic era stars, Jimmy Stewart, directed by a big-name director, Frank Capra, centered around the Christmas holiday season. And wait for it, it was free to broadcast on television. Well, that's a no-brainer. TV stations ran It's a Wonderful Life again and again, raking in ad revenue without paying a single cent in royalties. It was a good movie to begin with, but the constant exposure through the 70s and 80s simply cemented its place in American pop culture. It's a Wonderful Life became a Christmas tradition, even finding its way to AFI's top 100 greatest American films, from a flop to a family favorite. Well, that is until the early 90s, when all those television rebroadcasts suddenly stopped. Well, now you know the basic story. Let's dig deeper into the rabbit hole and look at the high-stakes game of studios and copyright. Let's back up to the beginning. In 1939, a Civil War historian by the name of Philip Van Doren Stern had a dream. This would become the basis for a short story called The Greatest Gift. After working on it for a few years and being unable to find a buyer, he sent this 4,000-word short story out as Christmas cards in December of 1943. Well, not so much Christmas cards, but more like Christmas pamphlets. One of these 200 or so pamphlets made its way to RKO producer David Hempstead. Hempstead thought this would make a perfect vehicle for Cary Grant and showed it to the actor, who also liked the idea. RKO struck a deal with Stern and bought the rights for the princely sum of $10,000. Hempstead got to work on the idea right away, commissioning screenwriters to adapt the short story. 3 separate screenplays were written, but they just It just didn't have it. So the project was halted, and RKO started looking for ways to unload the project. Well, they would find a buyer in Frank Capra. Capra sees something in the story and buys it off RKO for 10 grand. RKO throws in those 3 scripts for free. Capra, along with Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, begin reworking the script with additional scenes written by Joe Swerling. Not long after, the screenplay is ready to go. Capra announces that it would be his first feature produced under his very own brand new independent production company, Liberty Films. In the late 30s, there was a movement of stars and producers against the established studio system of classic Hollywood. In 1941, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, Walt Disney, Orson Welles, Samuel Goldwyn, David O. Selznick, Alexander Korda, and Walter Wanger formed the Society of Independent Motion Picture Producers to tackle the big studios and fight for independent production. Now, this group would be the lead on legal cases against the studios for their anti-competitive practices. Now, Frank Capra had become friends with many of these people, having been director and president of both the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences and the Directors Guild for multiple terms. After working pretty much independently for the government during World War II, Capra had very little interest in going back and working inside the politics of the studio system. Now, Capra had toyed with the idea of going independent before the war, but now he was ready to strike out on his own. In 1945, Capra started Liberty Films with former Columbia production executive and a longtime friend Samuel J. Briskin. Directors William Wyler and George Stevens joined in partnership soon after. Now, part of the strategy of starting a production company and becoming an equity shareholder was a way to avoid the 90% tax bracket the top dollar wage earners had at the studio. Being an equity owner means you could sell your shares in a few years and only pay the 25% capital gains tax. But Capra also saw an opportunity to have more control over his projects. He saw a future of directors who were also producers, and Liberty Films would be the financial and creative umbrella for him and others to create their films. As partner and fellow director William Wyler still owed Samuel Goldwyn a movie on a pre-war contract, the first film venture under the Liberty Films banner would be Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. Striking a distribution deal with RKO, Liberty produced the film for $2.3 million, the most expensive Capra movie to date. Well, after the box office returns had been counted, Liberty Films was in the hole for $525,000. To add insult to injury, Liberty Films partner William Wyler's film for Samuel Goldwyn would turn out to be The Best Years of Our Lives, which would go on to take in $11 million at the box office and sweep the Oscars, including winning Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor, all of which were in direct competition with It's a Wonderful Life. Liberty Films was about to crack after its first film out, and the partners began looking for a buyer. In May of 1947, Paramount Pictures would come in and buy up the company for $3.5 million in Paramount stock. Capra, Wyler, and Stevens were all given 5-picture contracts with Paramount, and the studio inherited the rights to Liberty's 3 movie properties: It's a Wonderful Life, I Remember Mama, which George Stevens was working on at RKO, and State of the Union, which was still in pre-production. In April of 1951, Liberty Films was completely dissolved. Capra would go on to direct a few television specials and a handful of movies before taking an early retirement after his last film, Industrial for the World's Fair, in 1964. When Paramount bought Liberty Films, It's a Wonderful Life was added to its pre-1950 library. Then in 1955, Paramount sells this library to UM&M TV, which is buying up shorts and cartoons to be turned around and syndicated on television. Included in this deal are over 1,600 short subjects and cartoons for $3.5 million. Well, it wasn't under UM&M's control for very long, as the next year the catalog is bought by the National Telefilm Associates, NTA, for $4 million. In 1957, NTA purchases what's left of Republic Pictures, a lower-tier studio started in 1935, which in itself was a merger of 6 Poverty Row studios: Monogram Pictures, Mascot Pictures, Liberty Pictures, not to be confused with Liberty Films, Majestic Pictures, Chesterfield Pictures, and Invincible Pictures. Republic had made a lot of Western serials, and when television first arrived and all the studios were in bunker mode, Republic was the first to approach broadcasters to syndicate their old film library. And that's how they made their money. By the mid to late 50s, Republic had pretty much shut down the production side of their business, relying mainly on television syndication revenue. Turnaround specialist Victor M. Carter would further diversify the B Film Studio into Republic Corporation, which also dealt in plastics and appliances. Well, back to NTA. So for about 20 years, NTA makes a lot of money off the Republic Library. And in 1983, NTA buys the rights to the name and logo and resurrects itself as Republic Pictures. During this time, the copyright renewal papers for It's a Wonderful Life didn't get filed and the film fell into the public domain. Under the 1909 Copyright Act, intellectual property was protected for 28 years, with an option at the end to renew for an additional 28 years. Well, no one renewed it, and Frank Capra, who had retired from filmmaking, didn't force the issue. Capra died in 1991. Shortly after, Republic Pictures saw a way to regain control over the holiday favorite, using a court case involving another Jimmy Stewart film. The grounds for reclaiming It's a Wonderful Life come from a key case in copyright law regarding Alfred Hitchcock's film Rear Window. Well, let's rewind again and start at the beginning of this story. A prolific crime noir writer by the name of Cornell Woolrich pens It Had to Be Murder for Dime Detective magazine in 1942. In 1945, he sells the movie rights to his stories to B.G. De Silva Productions for $9,250. In 1953, Jimmy Stewart and Alfred Hitchcock form Patron, a production company which buys the rights to It Had to Be Murder from B.G. De Silva Productions for $10,000 to make Rear Window in 1954. In the agreement, Patron is given permission to use the copyright during the first copyright period and the renewal period. But in 1968, before the renewal comes up, Cornell Woolrich dies, leaving no family or next of kin. The rights of the story are handled by the executor of his estate, Chase Manhattan Bank, for the benefit of Columbia University. In 1969, just shy of 28 years after the original publication, Chase Manhattan files for the renewal of the copyright for an additional 28 years and then sells the rights to literary agent Sheldon Abend for $650 plus 10% of all proceeds from the story. Abend buys another 100 or so movie and story rights. In 1971, the producers of Rear Window strike a deal to show the film on ABC television. Abend immediately sues in the U.S. District Court in New York, the Second Circuit, saying he has the rights to the original story and that showing it on television without permission infringed on his rights. Even though the original author Woolrich made a deal that the filmmakers could use the story after the renewal, he died before he could renew it. Therefore, the filmmakers would have to reach a new agreement with the new copyright holder. Well, they settle out of court for $25,000. Well, then, in 1977, a case reaches the United States Court of Appeals Second Circuit, that's the New York Circuit again, called Rohauer v. Killiam Shows. Well, in that case, the author of the book Sons of the Sheik, which became a successful 1926 Rudolph Valentino movie, died before he could renew the copyright. His daughter renewed it and assigned the rights to distributor Raymond Rohauer. Rohauer sued Killiam Shows for showing the movie without his consent. The lower district court held for Rohauer, but the higher-ranking Court of Appeals held for Killiam, saying they could show the film, which was a derivative work, without the permission of the copyright holder of the work that inspired it. Well, this gave the producers of Rear Window some encouragement. In 1983, they re-released Rear Window for theaters, on cable TV, and on videocassette and laserdisc. By 1988, they had brought in $12 million of revenue. Abend sues again, demanding half of the movie's proceeds. But this time, he does so in the Ninth Circuit, the California Circuit, which often differs in opinion from the Second, which is where Rohauer was decided. Well, that district court dismisses the case and finds for the studios based on Rohauer. Abend appeals to the appellate court. The appellate court finds for Abend. His tactic works. Then the studio appeals that ruling, and now the Supreme Court has to weigh in on this disagreement between the circuits. On April 24th, 1990, in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court decides in favor of Abend. Even though Woolrich agreed that Patron would have the rights after the renewal, he died before he could carry out that promise. That makes that promise an unfulfilled contingency. The court decided that you cannot bind the statutory successor to the same deal that the author made. Had the author lived to renew the copyright, well, no problem. But because he dies before the renewal, the successor gets to choose what happens to that property. Now, why is that? Well, the court justified it because the reasoning behind the renewal clause of the 1909 copyright law was to allow the author of a piece of work who may have sold it very cheaply a second chance to get a better deal once he or she has become more established, or in this case, the successor after the author becomes more dead. The Abend case shook up Hollywood. Lots of films based on short stories, books, and plays could potentially be in danger. Even though the Abend case was a very specific application, it laid the legal precedent that owners of the original story could still lay claim on the derivative works, something Republic would exploit to regain control over It's a Wonderful Life. Once It's a Wonderful Life fell into the public domain, it was stuck there for good. There's no way of recopywriting it. But Republic Pictures did still own the copyrights to the 4,000-word short story by Philip Van Doren Stern. For good measure, Republic bought up the rights of Dmitri Tiomkin's score in 1993, which is rather ironic as Capra had cut out a lot of Tiomkin's score for the final cut, leading to animosity and the two long-term collaborators never working with each other again. Now, armed with Stuart V. Abend, Republic Pictures, who now owned the rights to the short story and the score, sent out letters to the TV station stating that they intended to protect their interest in the film. The free-for-all was over. Nobody legally challenged Republic's claim. Republic set up a long-term deal with NBC, which paid royalties to run the Capra films a couple times a year around the holidays. In 1994, TV mega producer Aaron Spelling buys controlling shares in Republic and sells off video rights to Artisan Entertainment. By 2000, Spelling Entertainment is bought out by Viacom, and its film holdings get folded into Paramount Pictures, a Viacom subsidiary, who is now currently the distributor for It's a Wonderful Life. The Copyright Act of 1976 raises the length of copyright to the life of the author plus 50 years, so this kind of legal shenanigans is not likely to happen again. In 1999, the Copyright Term Extension Act, called the Sonny Bono Act, raises it to life plus 70 years and grants works of corporate authorship, which films fall under, to 120 years after creation or 95 years after publication, whichever endpoint is earlier. The copyrights of properties made before January 1st, 1978 were extended to a flat 95 years after their original publication date. This means Stern's The Greatest Gift copyright will expire in 2038, and Tiomkin's score will expire in 2041. Then, assuming Congress doesn't extend copyright terms even longer, It's a Wonderful Life will truly fall into the public domain. Now, there's no question in my mind that It's a Wonderful Life's decade or two of public domain status propelled it into a classic. The rebroadcast made it part of happy holiday memories. Its innocence and optimism in the human spirit fit so perfectly in the Yuletide tradition. But the authors of a piece of art are entitled to the fruits of their labor. And in saying that, so are the families of those artists, or whoever is designated as the inheritor of those copyrights. On the same token, corporations who finance and employ hundreds of people, raising and spending millions of dollars, they too are entitled to the rewards of their work. But remember, just because a work is under copyright protection doesn't mean it's not part of our collective culture. It just means that somebody has the monopoly over the financial gain of that property. But at some point, we as a society must say, that is long enough. That formulation of an idea now belongs to all of us, that we all can build upon it freely. How long is that? Is the current statute too long? Is it too short? Now, these are debates we can have, that we have to have. As much research as I've put into this series of videos, all I can say for certain is that this is not a cut and dried topic, despite what anyone on an internet video says. We as a society have been dealing with mass media for less than 100 years, digital barely 20 years, and our laws are still being fine-tuned for stuff that was written at the beginning of last century. Now, trust me, this is a complicated matter that needs you to look at it from all angles, all sides, and we are just barely starting to figure it out. But we will. It'll be messy and it'll take time, but we will figure it out. In the meantime, go make something that will have the power to inspire someone 50, 100, or 200 years from now. Go make something great. I'm John Hess. I'll see you at filmmakeriq.com.